Hi Ben Fire, this is Pablo Gomez with Rebound Physical Therapy. I know most of you by now. Welcome to your virtual drop-in sessions. So basically the reason why we're doing these videos is obviously we have a pandemic going on, so getting large groups together is kind of hard, but also just the fact that you guys have really tough schedules also makes videos a good way for us to communicate with you guys, get you guys exercises, and let you guys do some self-screen stuff. That being said, this isn't going to take place of drop-in clinic at all, so drop-in clinic is still going to be happening. So every Wednesday from 11 to noon, we're still going to be plugging that. These videos are a good way for us to remind you again that you need to get in for drop-ins. If you don't have my number or email, we're going to put that up on the screen here for you, hopefully. We'll give you lots of reminders on how to get in touch for drop-in. These videos are not going to take place of, if you have pain, if you have an injury, you're still going to try to get in to see me. The goal here is that you guys have some tools to not only treat yourselves, but also do a little bit of self-assessment. So some of the videos are going to be self-assessment, where you're going to actually be able to do some tests and figure out whether you should be coming in to drop in and see me, or whether maybe you should just be following the videos to try to make yourself feel a little bit better. So the way the videos are broken up, they're going to be broken up into 3 different parts. We're going to talk about mobility, which is basically just moving better. We're going to talk about stability, which is more of building strength around an area, so long duration holds. And then we're going to move into more functional movement patterns, which is going to be more of functional capacity, so letting you guys be able to move within those patterns. If you guys have any questions or suggestions on what you want to see, what we could do different in these videos, we'd love to hear it. Get in touch with me, pgomez@reboundoregon.com, and enjoy your videos. I hope they help. Hi Ben Fire, this is Pablo Gomez with Rebound PT. Welcome to this week's installment of your exercise video. Today is what we're going to talk about a lot is lifting. So we're going to go through some common lifting mistakes, some common lifting misconceptions, and then we're actually going to take you through some squatting and deadlifting. So those are the 2 primary kind of types of Olympic lifts we're going to talk about today. And those translate directly into how you guys are going to lift at work and on the job. So to talk just a little bit about kind of work-related lifting mistakes, I feel like there's a lot of kind of myths and bad information out there about what's good lifting and what's bad lifting. I think the number one thing for you guys to know is that the worst thing you can do is lift too much by yourself and not ask for help when you need it. I think that's probably the number one way people get hurt at work. There are a couple things that we want to try to avoid. So we've all heard that lifting with a rounded spine is bad, right? So if we're going to pick up something off of the floor, we definitely don't want to be here. We do want to try to maintain a neutral spine with most of what we're doing. We have heard in the past, right, lift with your legs and not with your back. Which that isn't entirely true. We don't necessarily want to always lift with our legs. We want to actually lift more with our glutes. And the way we do that is by getting into more of a hip hinge posture. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. So not necessarily lifting with legs. We definitely want to avoid, obviously, pulling with the spine. But we don't necessarily want to be way forward here and using legs like we've been told. We want to really get into our power source, which is more our posterior chain. So we're going to talk in a minute about how to get into that posterior chain. One of the other things we've heard a lot is lifting and twisting is bad. And that, again, is not necessarily true. If we're lifting and twisting and we have a good neutral spine, that's something that we are able to do. Where our spine gets really angry, however, is if we're in flexion and twisting. So flexion and twisting is one of the things that really tends to bother the spine and really lead to a lot of injury. So if we're in a neutral posture, twisting isn't a bad thing. We just need to avoid, again, that flexed posture when we're doing things on the job, when we're lifting. Again, asking for help. We've talked to some of you guys, especially like on the ambulance. Sometimes those carts are pretty heavy when you guys are lifting people into the back and stuff like that. Biggest thing is just make sure you have enough people to do the job properly and safely. And then pay attention to your mechanics as well. I know we've talked before, and there's a lot of situations that you guys get yourselves in that aren't necessarily ideal for you guys to get into really good postures. So again, it's just, make sure you have enough help. And if you don't, ask for it if you can. Sometimes you're not going to be able to, and you're just going to have to problem solve on the job. So let's talk a little bit about the hip hinge. So the hip hinge, I told you, is how we get into basically our posterior chain. So we're going to talk today about two different things. We're going to talk about squats and deadlifts, and I'm going to go over real quick kind of the difference between the two, the difference between that hinge, and then Jordan's going to take you through a little bit more about how we're actually going to do those. So with a squat, we all know that the knees are able to come forward, right? So if I'm doing a squat, my knees are translating forward of my ankle, right? I still have a flat back and my hips are still getting behind me, but I do have this anterior knee translation, okay? So this is a little bit more of what we would consider a knee hinge, okay? So that creates a lot more stress and pressure through the patellofemoral joint, through the knees. Good posture for the back and a good posture for the hips, but not necessarily super good for the knees. We're not engaging nearly as much posterior chain with a squat as we are a deadlift. So we're being very quad dominant in that position, and a lot of us in bend are very quad dominant in everything we do. So we all ski, we all bike, and we all tend to like to be in this position and lift from this position. Not necessarily the most powerful position. So the second thing we're going to talk about is more that hip hinge. So we talked about how this is more of a knee hinge. So the hip hinge, and this is what we're going to use in more of a deadlift posture, is the hips get behind us and there's no anterior translation of the knee. So my tibia, which is that bottom bone, should stay perpendicular to the floor. So if I'm getting into a good hip hinge, then I'm engaging more through that glute and hamstring, and that's going to create more power and more protection for my low back. I'm going to show you two ways to work on this a little bit at home, and then Jordan's going to get into a little bit more specifics on squatting and deadlifting. So my two favorite drills for practicing that hip hinge versus that knee hinge that we talked about are, one is just, we call it like a butt bump on the wall. So if this was a wall right here, and I have you stand maybe 6-8 inches in front of it, and I ask you to hinge, or if I ask you to try to get your butt to the wall, and you're somebody that does this and can't find the wall, then we're not doing very good with that hip hinge, okay? So what we really have to focus on is getting the hips to go posterior and tapping the wall, okay? So that's getting into a much better hip hinge versus if I'm searching for the wall right here and I can't find it, then I'm being way too knee dominant, okay? Second one I'm going to show you is with a stick. So this is a good way to work on posture. So if you're somebody who has a hard time maybe being too rounded in that upper back, or maybe somebody who you've been told that you lift with a little bit more of a rounded spine, then this is a really good drill for you. So we're going to put that stick on your back. I want it to touch your tailbone, touch the mid back, and then touch the back of your head, okay? This space that's right here, some of us are going to have a lot of it, some of us a little bit less. I want you to try to lessen that space as much as you can. So try to get your back as flat as you can against that stick, and then we're going to practice that hip hinge just like we did on the wall. So you're going to get those hips to go behind you with a flat back and back up. Okay, use those glutes to come back up. Feel that pinch at the top. So you're going to practice that reach. Okay? So again, this is engaging all through the back of the leg into that posterior chain. If I am bending, it's going to be hard to keep that stick. If I'm doing a knee hinge, it's going to be really hard to keep that stick. So this is really going to train you into that posture of being able to get into a good hip hinge. And then we're going to be able to translate that to being able to lift safer and lift probably more and more powerfully without as much risk for injury. So next up, Jordan's going to take you through some mechanics on actually squatting and deadlifting in the gym, so you guys can work on that.
All right, in our lifting exercises, I know what you guys have all been waiting patiently for. We're going to start with the squats, break down kind of a front loading, back loading, and then different exercises that you can use to incorporate a squat position. Again, on this, I can't emphasize enough that increasing weight doesn't necessarily make the exercise harder. And we'll touch on this through every single thing. If you feel like an exercise is easy or that you need to add more weight, slow the exercise down. Take it very, very slow and pause in your end range of motion. If you can do 5 reps with a 5-second lower, a 5-second hold, and then a quick dynamic drive up, then go ahead and increase weight. If you can't do that, continue to work through the function of that exercise with the lower weight with a longer time. Okay? So we're going to start with squats. We're going to discuss front-loading squats versus back-loading squats. Dalton, my wonderful model here, redemption from last time, is going to show this using a barbell, which is a very standard use. On this, you can also use a safety bar if you have access to it for specifically backloading. What to assess on a front load versus a back load. So we'll start with the standard backloaded squats, where the bar is up and behind you. And go ahead and turn sideways for me. What to be aware is that when the weight is on your back here, what it has a tendency to do is load straight down and load the back of the body. Most people's compensation with this load back here is to actually shift the chest forward, which is going to put all of this load into this mid part of the back. The other problem here is that it restricts your ability to go into a full extension through the spine. So you just took an exercise that's supposed to be for your glutes and your hamstrings and your quads and put it into your upper torso. So be aware of this. If you have this weight on and you feel yourself pitching forward and you can't get yourself upright without swaying through this low back, go ahead and transfer that weight to the front of the body, and that way you can get the core and the front of the body engaged properly without compensating in the low back. Okay? So taking this, moving into a front squat, standard front squat here, or you can do the shoulder carry front squat. Now this weight is forward. The tendency, instead of pitching forward, is to pitch backwards a little bit. He can save this by squeezing those glutes, deep diaphragmatic breath here, getting that core work engaged that we talked about in our last videos, making sure that the spine is upright. The other thing about this is that just by default, because you're wanting to pitch backwards, the front of your body will engage. Okay? If you have wrist issues, you can always do the shoulder carry by crossing here and trying to use that little groove. Or for the sake of our demonstrations, we're actually going to be using a goblet for front squats instead of a barbell, but I know you guys have better access to weights when it comes to barbells. Okay? So difference between a front squat and a back squat. If you do have a history of back injuries, back pain, back strain, front squat is going to be ideal for you. If you're someone who is very comfortable with their abdominals and you want to challenge the extensors and the back muscles, back squat. Okay? That's going to be your big differentiation. The first exercise we're going to do here is something called an elevator squat. So challenging your ability to maintain form and function over a slow period of time. Again, for the sake of this, we're going to be using a kettlebell, and we're going to do this we're going to do this as a goblet. So with a goblet, you're going to be holding on to the horns of the kettlebell, and we're going to bring that right up into the chest. His armpits are going to be squeezed nice and tight. You're essentially pulling that weight into you and just adding that weight to the front of the torso. From here, we're going to use this box as a reference point. He's going to be doing 5-second, 3-leveled squats. Okay? What this is going to look like is we're going to start nice braced core. He's going to start with his hinge, which is important to loading that posterior chain and anterior chain, getting the glutes engaged. He's going to shift just a little bit, hold for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then he's going to continue that movement, hit back just a little bit. Next level, hold, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way down to about 90 degrees where he's just barely hovering over, shifting back into that midfoot a little bit. Hold 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, a nice dynamic lift all the way up. Ending when the glutes are squeezed, not when the chest is upright. Okay? I want to make sure that you are not perceiving this as an extension, a full upright extension, versus here. When the core is engaged, the glutes are engaged. He's upright, but he's not lifting and extending through the chest. So let's do that one more time for the people at Benfire. So holding that chest and the weight here, engaging that core down and back so he's not extending away from the weight. Okay, he starts by shifting his center of gravity back, going to that hinge, barely even bending in the knees, holding for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then he drops to his next level, holding, breathing, diaphragmatic breath, big forceful exhale when you hear it. Good, and that last level, all the way down, just hovering where you almost can sit down, but you're not. 3, 2, 1, dynamic, squeezing, lifting through the glutes, okay? Making sure to let those glute muscles lead this exercise. Again, 5 seconds in each level, 5 reps. That's all we need on this one, okay? From here, we're gonna move to a regular goblet squat. With this goblet squat, same setup here, but you're going to be doing this more rapidly, okay? Using the same focus that you just did with the elevator squat, which really sets you up for success. You're gonna do 15 reps, sitting back through those hips, tapping, driving up. Remember, anytime we're doing a squat, you're competing against gravity. This is a good concept with lifting. When you're competing against gravity, that means if everything is pushing down, you're controlling your way down and you're resisting on your way up. Okay? You're controlling your way down, resisting on the way up. If we pause and we take a break, you're resisting in that sort of stagnant place, always competing against gravity. If you release yourself into a squat, then you're not competing, you're not engaging, you're collapsing to gravity. Okay? From here, so double leg bilateral squats, we have that goblet squat, we have the elevator squat. Both can be done either with a weight at the chest, weight at the side, barbell, front loaded or back loaded. We're gonna move to a single leg squat, very important. Through this, we're gonna do a pistol step off. A pistol squat really focuses on the torso staying a bit more upright, which is standard with the squat, and working on extending the opposing leg. You don't have to go very high for this, but as this gets easier and gets easier, you're going to elevate this. So we're using a step. This is about 8 inches off the ground. He's gonna start standing all the way up on this. Torso stays upright, we get that core engaged. His hips shift back first, just like they did with the elevator. This leg pushes forward, and we sit, 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 until he taps that heel and comes back up. Good. Air. So it is a misconception that you can't squat without letting your knees go past your toes. There are many situations where your knees have to go past your toes. Where it becomes important is when it's all happening in the leg. If he took everything, go sideways just for me so they can see this. If he does this squat, do it all on your knee and all your quads. So you can see here that pistol, everything into his leg and quad. This creates a quad dominance, puts a lot of strain on that knee and a lot of pressure on this knee. He's not recruiting anything at this hip joint. That is an issue. So instead, we're gonna hinge first through the hip. We're gonna sit back. The load is here in the glute instead of in the quad and that knee. Stronger muscles here, stronger in the pelvis, tapping, and then driving up through, using the quad as sort of a secondary to these nice strong glute muscles. So pistol step offs, 2 sets, 10 reps each side. Start small. I mean, you can even do this on the ground as a standard pistol and get plenty of progress from it. The last exercise here in our lifting for squats is going to be our sumo squat. So a lot of people want to do these deep squats. Functionally speaking, very few people can load a deep squat. So anything past 90 is what I'm referring to. Unless you have very, very good flexibility in your hamstrings, very, very stable core, it is rare that you can go past that 90 degrees and not compromise somewhere in your spine. But if you do want to practice those end range of motions, you do want to get through that, a sumo squat is a great place to do it. So sumo squat is a wide stance squat. From this, you can actually turn your toes out slightly. Good. You're going to take a stance slightly wider than torso here. No, toes are pointing out slightly. Most important thing that I want to see is that his knees are pointing out towards the feet. They're not diving in or caving in. And then as he goes into the squat, we're doing this unloaded first, so that make sure he can get that function. Those knees are going to splay out, tracking right over top that middle of the foot, and he's dropping down as low as he can go before his knees start to dive in. Really crank that out there. Yeah. Good. And then driving up through the midfoot, squeezing the glutes at the end. Okay? Remember, focusing on squeezing the glutes, not locking at the knees when you come into a lift. So now that we know he can get full range on there, we're going to take this, load it with a goblet. Okay? Knees are going to be pointing out, toes are slightly out. Sitting back into those hips, finding that deep position, really stretching into it, and then driving up. Okay? Don't go too wide with this. Again, if you go too wide, you may not be able to get that external rotation to get the knees in line with the feet. And if you go too narrow, you might not be able to get the deep range of motion that you're looking for. Okay? So with a sumo squat, great way, go ahead and turn sideways just so they can kind of see. Here, do a standard squat for me. Unloaded. All right, standard squat for me. Feet a little bit closer. And I want you to drop as low as you can go. Not bad, not bad. So good example here, what you saw when he went into this deep squat is that tailbone tuck under. When that tailbone tucks under, it disengages the core, it puts all the pressure on that low back. So go ahead, come on back up. Find your sumo squat position. Just a little bit more, and then turn that right foot out just slightly. Okay, now from this, I want you to drop as low as you can. So watching that pelvis, still a little bit of tuck, but not as bad. See, once he gets into this lower position, he's automatically stopped by his lack of range of motion versus going all the way to the ground, loading that, and putting himself at risk. So playing around with that sumo squat. All right, moving into our deadlift portion of the lifting exercises. Again, Pablo touched on the difference between a deadlift and a squat. Remember, a deadlift is very hip dominant, very hip hinge. The shin stays perpendicular to the floor, so the knees don't come forward at all. This puts all of that weight and pressure into the hips versus sharing it with the quads like you get in a squat. The first exercise we have here is a banded hip hinge. This is adding resistance to the stick hinge that Pablo talked about. With this, you're going to use a pretty heavy band. So this was an 1.5 inch resistance band. You're going to attach it behind you to a squat rack, something that's very stable. For Dalton's sake, I'm going to be that stable person. Please don't pull me over.
You are my stable person.
You're going to turn sideways. So go here. Okay. This is going to go at your hip, so just below that hip bone. So it's right at the crease of your hinge. Okay. It's not going to be up in your belly because that will not allow you to actually work through this hinging pattern. Just below the bony process of your hips. And then it's going to be attached directly behind you. From here, you're going to take a step forward until you feel like you can kind of hold yourself against that resistance. Okay? Feet shoulder width apart, knees directly over top those toes. Engage the core, big inhale, big exhale. For the sake of this, I'm going to have you have your hands overhead. On your head. There you go. Ribs down, back and in. He's going to let the resistance pull his hips backwards, keeping that spine from rounding. Once he's in there, he'll feel a little stretch on the hamstrings. That is your indication that you're actually recruiting the pelvis. And then squeeze to the glutes. Yep. And then release. Let that pelvis come back. Feel that little bit of stretch. Eyes up just a little more for me, Dalton. And then pull your elbows. Yeah. There we go. And sit back. So pull your elbows out and open. There, that's better. So he's sitting back in those heels, feeling that little strain on the hamstrings. And then squeezing the glutes, driving the hips forward against that resistance to really get this hinge set into place. You're going to do this 12 times. Think of this as a warm-up, sort of a waking up the body, waking up the brain to understand that hinge pattern, getting the glutes fired and the hamstrings warmed up. Okay, 12 reps. One thing to focus on, I'm going to do this just without the resistance here. Go ahead and do this again. Notice I did cue him on this because he had overhead to make sure there's a little bit of engagement in the spine. That's going to help him from rounding, so go ahead and do that again for me, hands overhead. As he goes into his hinge pattern, he's squeezing those elbows back behind him. That's going to keep him from rounding and keeping this nice long length through the spine. If he continued to let that wrap, go ahead again. Notice how he kind of rounded through the spine here. He got rid of a lot of that hinging pattern range of motion. So banded hip hinge, 12 times warming up the body. From here, we're going to go into something called a deadlift ISO. The deadlift ISO, we're setting up into a deadlift position, getting to the hardest part of the deadlift, which is positioning and holding there. And just letting the body take in all of that resistance of holding in a deadlift position. For you guys, you're going to probably be using a barbell with heavy weights. Those weights should be high enough that you wouldn't necessarily lift it, but enough that you can kind of leverage and lean on it without falling over or without it lifting up off the ground. For ours, we're going to be using a heavy kettlebell. This kettlebell is just enough that it challenges enough you can sit back into it without falling over. Okay? So setup on this, again, a little different with the barbell, but you're just going to let that barbell come right up to the shins. He's going to place the midfoot right along the horn. So again, imagining that this is a barbell going straight through here. Feet staying hip width apart. Arms and hands are going to be in the front of the thighs. And he's going to set himself up like a short stop on this. He's going to set those hips back as he glides the hand down the thighs. Once he gets to about the knees is when his hips are going to start to drop a little bit. So everything's hinge, 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 sitting back into those hips, back into those hips until he grabs on. Once he's here, I'm going to load his hamstrings. I'm going to ask him to squeeze that bar and then to push up through the hips, so push up against me, until he feels those hamstrings screaming at him. Okay? They should be pulling and tugging and trying to get him to stand up and yell at him. He's going to push those knees out away from his elbows, sit back into the heels just a little bit more, feel all that load, and then he's going to hold, and he's just going to hang out here. He's going to hang out here until he hits fatigue. Typically that's around a minute, but it could be 30 seconds, 45 seconds. Continuing to think about driving up through those feet, trying to lift and stretch through those hamstrings, squeezing between the shoulder blades, really feeling that tension in the mid, tucking the chin nice and long, sitting in the heels, holding, breathing, using your core engagements and diaphragmatic breaths all the way through here. Good. Go ahead and take a break. He's going to let go. He's going to stand like he's lifting. Okay. You're going to do this twice. Okay. So twice to fatigue. You're getting into the position. Making sure the knees are in the right position. The hips are far back behind you. The hamstrings are getting tugged on and engaged. The core is engaging. And then you're going to move into a standard deadlift. So he's going to go back into his positioning. Now that he's mastered it, he's held that position. His body's told him over the last minute to stand up, stand up, stand up. He's going to take a big inhale, a big forceful exhale, stand and lift. But if you're doing this with a barbell, your hands are going to be a little bit wider as far as hands go and positioning goes. If you do have shoulder issues, a lot of times palms forward is good, or over under is good. If you do not have issues with that, it's kind of a comfort level. Just make sure your thumbs are around, no monkey grips. Okay? Do that 2 more times for me, just so we can see that deadlift. So once you've done your 2 deadlift ISOs, you're moving into that standard deadlift. You're going to do 5 reps, slow and control on the way down, nice and strong as you come up. A lot of times people forget that it's not just about lifting the weight, it's about putting that weight right back down safely. Okay? Making sure the knees are staying back behind the laces. That's the difference between squat and a deadlift. Putting all that weight in the posterior chain, the back of his body, sitting back, hinge, hinge, hamstrings, hamstrings. Good, go ahead and rest. All right, the last part of our deadlift exercise is going to be a split squat deadlift. So challenging this, again, you guys don't have the opportunity to always lift in a perfect environment where you can, you know, set your feet up in the right position and hinge and have enough space to do that. So a lot of times the split squat deadlift is a great option for lifting in precarious positions. 1 foot in a bathtub, 1 foot out, wedged in behind a cupboard, whatever position that you've been put. So with this split stance, we're gonna use, for the sake of this, we're gonna use 2 weights. And he's going to be deadlifting, so lifting this off. You will be doing this either with 2 weights, since you guys do have options for that, or a barbell. And we're gonna, have you done split squats? So we're gonna go like this, just like you do in a hex bar. And then we're gonna sit back through that position. So I'm gonna have him demonstrate this from the front so you can see where his pelvis is, and from the side so you can see how his feet are positioned. You're gonna line these kettlebells. Actually, you can kind of do it here. So that the horn of this is at about the midfoot, arch of the foot. Again, this is hip dominant. This is not a squat. This is a split stance. So from here, both feet are flat on the ground. You can go a little wider with your stance because it's not gymnastics. You don't need to be on a balance beam. So nice wide stance here. He's gonna bend through that back knee and hinge his hips backwards to get that length, okay? This knee stays forward, it stretches a little bit into that hamstring, torso goes back, so hips back, hips back. From here, he's using this back glute, squeezing as he lifts, pushing through the heel, using that quad to stand, coming all up to a standing position. This back leg and extension is where we're really getting the glute activation. Again, lowering the weight is just as important as lifting it. Hips go back, hips go back. Good, go ahead and go sideways so they can see this. Okay, so side angle here. He's taking a wider stance. It doesn't have to be in line. Wider stance here. He's sitting back through those hips. I'd even say really plank this back heel. There you go. Challenge those hamstring length. Okay, so nice flat back. This shin stays perpendicular. He's using this glute to engage and lift, standing all the way up and engaging into that extension. And then slowly and controlled hinging, loading those hamstrings as he goes down. Go ahead, one more for me. And back up, good. If you ever have access to a hex bar, perfect tool for doing this split stance deadlift, okay? 3 sets, 5 each side. Low weight. If you feel like you're ready to increase weight, again, challenge it with tempo. Go very slow, 5 seconds down, 5-second hold in the end range, and really quick and dynamic. You can do 5 of those and go ahead and move up in weight. Good luck lifting.